Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And for those of you who wanted just informative content, you saw the title of this video when you clicked on it. If you want informative stuff, I did that earlier today. But now we're going to talk about one of my favorite people on YouTube Fitness, Junkie Ward. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this, because apparently a few days ago, good old Junkie Ward made a video talking about how he's going to start doing occlusion training. And thank you to the subscriber who awared me of this. Now, I'm going to do my best in this video not to be a dick, but sometimes I can't help it. It's just a flaw in my personality. So let me get this straight. Junkie Ward has discovered a new old that kind of went out of vogue, I think, recently. I made a video on that a couple weeks ago that hopefully no one else is still doing this silly crap. But he discovered a training method that allows him to wrap tourniquets around his arm. So I gotta wonder, when he's wrapping these tourniquets around his arm, does it bring him back to the good old days? Like, does a song pop in his head? Hello, darkness, my old friend. Just saying. Just saying. That is funny. That's funny. I don't care who you are. That is funny. What's the laugh, people? But in all seriousness, you know, Jerry's philosophy is that you have to try everything. You don't know if something works or not until you try it, which, you know, I'm of the opinion is really an absurd way to go about doing things. I mean, at this point, he's been competing for decades, and if he doesn't know what works by now, well, then again, he doesn't really win, does he? Doesn't really win. I mean, he placed last at his last pro qualifier. He's been trying to go pro in like bodybuilding or men's physique or whatever he's doing now for a couple decades. He still hadn't got that pro card. He seems to be a decent enough coach, don't get me wrong, but he gets a lot of his women in really good shape. His women win stuff. But he doesn't do too good. In spite of, remember, admitting to using a couple grams of gear. A couple grams. We're not going to rehash all that. I covered that recently. I think the last time I covered him. But you guys get the idea. It's like he's always like, oh, I got to try new things. Well, why can't you just look at some logic and reason and realize something doesn't work? I mean, if it became popular to do bicep curls to make your quads grow, would you need to try that to know it? I mean, seriously, do you really need to try everything to see if it works? Even stupid stuff? Stupid stuff that is clearly stupid and dangerous, like wrapping tourniquets around yourself while you're exercising? I mean, the question becomes, who in the hell even came up with this theory? Who even came up with the theory? And the research on it is terrible. And that's the thing that I've been saying for years. For years. The research done on this stuff is terrible. It's not conclusive. It's not useful. There's nothing in the research that I've ever seen that, when I looked at what they found and the way they did the studies on this stuff, that I would have stepped back and said, you know, I should try this. Now, it got trendy with a bunch of people. Lane Norton, good old Lane Nordstrom. He got big on it for a while. The 3DMJ or whatever, I can't remember the full thing, for their group with Nunez and Eric Helms and all those guys. They all got into it for a while. But you notice it's kind of fallen out of vogue because it's silly. It's silly. It's trendy, stupid nonsense that, quite frankly, is risky. I mean, you are directly restricting blood flow to body parts that you are exercising. That does carry with it a small chance of tissue damage that might be a problem. Like, you could actually harm yourself doing this. And the thing is, the whole concept behind it is ridiculous because it just involves anabolic metabolites. But you need to understand that doesn't ensure any sort of growth. And the other thing is, even the studies that were done, they didn't do true side-by-side comparisons. Meaning, the way I broke this down before, we have these studies showing that really, really lightweight, high-rep sets taken to failure, with weights as light as 30% of your max, doing 25 and 30 rep sets to failure, seem to stimulate hypertrophy, right? In fact, they showed the same anabolic metabolites in the bloodstream that doing what's textbook considered to be hypertrophy range training got, right? Remember all that those studies came out about a year before all this blood flow restriction stuff, and all these people, including Brad Schoenfeld, these other people said, yeah, it does seem to be the case. It does seem to do that. We're resistant to it. We're resistant to the idea, but the evidence is pretty strong. Now, it is also interesting that Greg Nuckols and Eric Helms, actually this last week, released some stuff together showing that that's really not practical, that it might work in the lab, but it isn't really particularly practical for the real world. They wouldn't recommend it. So again, these are science guys. These are scientists saying, well, wouldn't really recommend it. It's not practical. Well, here's the thing. Blood flow restriction is the same thing with bands put on. And they did separate studies to where they did the same sort of stuff. Just like they compared the really high rep training to hypertrophy range training and got the same results on the bloodstream as far as the release of metabolites that are associated with anabolic response, right? Well, the same sort of studies were done with blood flow restriction, but instead of comparing blood flow restriction to the exact same thing without the bands, they compared it to the traditional hypertrophy training too, and it got similar results. Well, what's the difference? Meaning, if you were to take these set of studies looking at the really light weight that were done with no concern for blood flow restriction, it wasn't being studied, and then you compare with the results of the blood flow restriction studies, which are also doing really light weight for really high reps, but with bands tied on, they got pretty similar results. Since they've never been compared, wouldn't it be reasonable to conclude that maybe the same thing would happen? In other words, if you took the bands off and you were to compare a group of people who did the really lightweight 30 rep sets without the bands, and those who did them with the bands, that they might get similar results. In other words, the bands weren't really the cause, because you haven't checked to see if that variable, they didn't do a direct comparison. They changed multiple variables from the blood flow restriction to the main groups. In other words, we don't have any direct comparisons of blood flow restriction doing the exact same rep ranges and training to failure without them, or even with the same weights to see if the same response was done. Furthermore, no one's ever studied to see, hey, all right, this is what happens in the bloodstream, but if we do this for 6 months straight, do they actually gain as much muscle as the conventional training? Now, here's the other kicker. No one is saying, who is even conducting the studies on this, that it produced better results. All right, that's not what they were saying. They were saying you could tie these bands on your arms and use really light weights so that it's in theory easier on your joints. I'm sorry, guys, I lift really, really heavy and I don't have problems with my joints, and I'm 41 years old. So I'm not really sure what they're trying to conclude with what's going to be easier on your joints. I'm sorry, if you learn how to deadlift correctly, 600-pound deadlifts are easy on your joints too. Just throwing that out there. Lightweight isn't necessarily better for your joints, but I digress. But the whole point is that you could get the same results using really lightweight because of the bands. In terms of hypertrophy, not strength, but hypertrophy. But then you got to buy bands, and you have to wrap bands around yourself so you look like a jackass or like a junkie in the gym, wrapping tourniquets around your arms. Or in some cases, makes you look hardcore, bro. I like to wrap the tourniquets around my arms and scream while I do it. It's trendy nonsense. Why can't someone just pick up a dumbbell and do curls? Why do they need the tourniquets? It's not like any of the data and concept behind it even suggested it was superior. It was just that, hey, we could use really lightweight and get the same results. But they also have other studies showing that just using the really light weights without the bands gets similar results. It's absurdity. It's absolute absurdity, and it's where people aren't looking at one set of studies when they're comparing this to what they're doing, and they're looking at it in isolation without comparing it to the other stuff. So at this point, when I saw all that and looked at it, to me, anyone who wastes their time doing it, just in my opinion, a jackass. No offense to any of you who have tried this, but you jumped on some trendy nonsense without thinking it through. Incidentally enough, all the same people who promote this are the same people who promoted all the branched-chain amino acids, and now we have studies now showing that branched-chain amino acids don't do anything for muscle growth or recovery of muscle tissue. They do nothing to help your gains. Just another trend so that people can do something different and something new and reinvent the wheel instead of sticking with what we know actually works. Because God forbid, eating a balanced diet, using progressive overload on basic exercises and a good training program and getting plenty of sleep. I mean, God forbid anyone actually try that, right? We always have to have something new because that just doesn't work. But that's the thing. It was never, oh, it's going to be better. We just think it will be equal to the conventional normal training. That was the whole hypothesis. And no one who's done research has ever suggested that it was even remotely better. Yet everyone's like, I want to try it to see if it works for me. Well, how are you going to know if it works for you if you continue to make the same gains you were always making? If you don't lose muscle in your arms, you know it worked. Absurdity. And this is the exact sort of stupid BS nonsense that you can expect Junkie War to jump on, to try for himself to see if it works. And the upside, he gets to wrap tourniquets around his arms. Brings back some memories.
Well, I might have something to say. Jerry, I heard those Tide Pods, they're really anabolic. You might want to check those out. You got to suck on them a little bit and get them juicy.
Yeah, you hear that, Jerry? Give that a try, man. We heard those Tide Pods will give you all sorts of gains. That's right. Unless you try it for yourself, you don't really know, do you?
It's the forbidden fruit.
That's right. Take the Tide Pod challenge.